Hello and welcome to the morning sports briefing here on the Saturday, the 9th of May. Coming to you live at 8 a.m. every morning on the New Zealand Sports Radio. So don't forget to like the page, or if you prefer to listen whilst you're going about your business, you can download the podcast. Just search for New Zealand Sports Radio on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, or your favourite pod-catching app. In news today, we have an update on the NRL flu vaccinations. There is a whole host of updates in New Zealand rugby, as we had announcements of a restructure that's happening that could lead to as much as a 50% reduction in head force for New Zealand rugby. Also, overnight, there have come out reports of New Zealand rugby talking with private equity companies as well. So a whole host to discuss and get our teeth into there. We also have news around the NBL, or the National Basketball League, here in New Zealand, and how that might start up, and also a look at grassroots rugby as well. So kicking off with that NRL, and there have been 3 Gold Coast Titan players stood down for refusing to take the flu jab. The Queensland government has said that a waiver is not appropriate, and that part of the agreement with NRL was that all players would have flu jabs. So the 3 players who have decided not to take flu jabs will not be allowed to take part for the Gold Coast Titans. One of the players who has Nathan Peets has come out and taken to Twitter and said, look, it's not a moral issue for him. The reason that he said no was that he has had a negative reaction to a flu jab in previous years, and that's why he said no, because he thought there was an option to say yes or no. Now he's seen now he understands the how it has blown up. He said he was going to say yes and have it. He said if he realised how it was going to blow up, he would have said yes straight away. So clearly, it's understandable why he said no. He thought it was optional, and that having had an adverse reaction, you can understand why someone might be reticent to have it again. Whilst that is the situation in Queensland, it's not clear. In New South Wales, it looks like the declaration may be enough to go forwards. There hasn't been any advice yet as to whether they have to have those flu jabs or not. The national lead has been, they think it would be a good idea, but they say it is down to individual states to make that decision, not to the national government. But their personal opinion is that all players should have flu jabs to be allowed to play. So interesting there that situation. We'll keep an eye on that as it progresses. Moving over to rugby, then it came out in Stuff yesterday that New Zealand Rugby are having a review of all of their staff, going through a consultation process. And it looks like up to half of their 180 full-time jobs around the country could be are under threat. This comes after the national body announced a $7.5 million loss for last year, and is forecasting a worst-case scenario of a $120 million revenue decline this year. The CEO, Mark Robinson, confirmed on a media conference call yesterday that they are working through consultation with their people at the moment on that, and obviously a challenging time for rugby. So we are taking all steps to make sure we contribute directly with our staff. So clearly, yes, a very unsettling time in New Zealand rugby at the moment. We kind of mentioned or touched on that yesterday when we talked about Sam Cane being announced as captain, that yes, it's an unsettling time for the players as well, and that leadership is required. So we'll see how that one progresses over the next week or so. Also, they joined that call. They talked about the 10-week 2-round 8-rower Super Rugby competition by 2 rounds, being home and away. So the five teams will each play 8 games over those 10 weeks, with the champion being who's top of the table at the end. There'll be no finals series in that. However, coming out of Australia, there have been suggestions that there could be a final series between the Australian champions and the New Zealand champions, as the Australian champions do come up with the same sort of thing. They are prepared. Came out that during that interview, during that talk, that the New Zealand Rugby is prepared to go as deep as December to have All Blacks test matches. And they're looking to see an all effort they can do to make to produce test matches for. I've gone blank. Ian Foster to take his team out for. Now, clearly, they were asked about potential Bledisloe Cup and etc. He said, "Look, those sort of things are on the table. Lots of things on the table, but it's too early at this stage to comment or to have any firm position on those." So, lots of things there. Also, they're definitely looking at getting domestic competition back, like Mitre 10 Cup and the Farah Palmer Cup as well. But it all remains very fluid. Was the term that Robinson used there. Some sad news in international rugby with the passing of coach George Simkin, who travelled around the world with his coaching, both at 15s and 7s, making a big impact in places such as China, Hong Kong, Fiji, Sri Lanka, and Germany. Our thoughts with his family at this time. They have decided that they're going to wait until the lockdown is finished. They can have a proper celebration of his life. So keep an eye out for that one. Obviously, a major name here in the Waikato. He passed away with cancer. This was not a COVID related thing. Going to hand you over now to Stephen, who will take us through our birthdays for today.
Good morning, everyone. And birthdays today, a very underrated cricket player, an Indian-born black stick, and a New Zealand motor racing driver on top of. Good morning, everyone. And birthdays today, a very underrated cricket player, an Indian-born black stick, and a New Zealand motor racing driver on top of his game. Shane Robert van Gisbergen, born this day on the 9th of May 1989, is a New Zealand racing driver competing in the Virgin Australian Supercars Championship. He currently drives the 97 Holden ZB Commodore for 888 Racing Engineering. Van Gisbergen has also forged a successful GT career, including multiple entries in the 24 Hours of Daytona for Alex Job Racing and competing in the Black Pain Endurance Series for McLaren with Von Ryan Racing and Garage 59. The talented driver, who turns 30 today, has driven in 371 races, won 35, and has had 101 podium finishes. Very impressive. Matish Kishorbhai Patel, born this day, 9th of May 1976, in Gujarat, India, is a field hockey player from New Zealand who earned his first cap for the national team, named the Black Sticks, in 1998. Patel, who turns 44 today, has earned 135 caps during his career. And finally, Andrew Howard-Jones, born this day, the 9th of May 1959, is a former New Zealand cricketer. From 1987 to 1995, he played 39 tests and 87 one-day internationals for New Zealand. At domestic level, he played for Central Districts, Otago, and Wellington. Jones, who turned 61 today, scored 2,922 runs and an average of 44.3. A very handy cricketer during New Zealand's halcyon days during the 1980s. And that's all we have in birthdays today.
Thank you very much, Stephen, for that. And we wish them all a happy birthday and a safe birthday as well. Continuing with rugby, New Zealand, it's come out overnight on the New Zealand Herald that New Zealand Rugby is engaged with a multi-billion-dollar investment firm to take a stake in the struggling sport. They have, by the sound, been in talks with a number of different investment companies, with two of them out of Europe. One of those being CVC. But we knew that we'd had rumours of them of CVC talking with South Africa and New Zealand a couple of months ago now, but nothing came of that. It looks like Silver Lake now is the preferred partners. Just a reminder that one of the reasons that the national or the Nations Cup or the content or the new structure they were talking about in World Rugby. One of the reasons that floundered was that the investment company involved in that was from Switzerland, whilst the Six Nations were talking to CVC. It didn't come out at the time, but this came out afterwards. So that Swiss company could have been the one that New Zealand Rugby were talking to. However, as I say, it's the American one that looks like the preferred suitor at the moment. They are still some way from a deal, and these talks have been postponed during the coronavirus. They sort of have to get back to it. But there has apparently been a sea change in attitude at New Zealand Rugby, which has had a very much a traditional and conservative attitude previously. A reshaped world rugby, or rugby world, is looking more and more likely, with more and more of these investment companies getting involved. The CVC discussions have also been on hold during the coronavirus with the Six Nations, and we also heard of Augusto Pichot talking as part of his pitch that potentially of a CVC or other investment company coming in. Now, with Bill Beaumont having been voted in instead of Augusto Pichot, that's seen as a much more traditional and conservative move, and so hence New Zealand Rugby is having to look outside of other options. The Silver Lake have got investments in the UFC, Madison Square Gardens, which own the New York Knicks, and also the New York Rangers in the ice hockey, and also the football team as well. And they also have a football group with Manchester City as part of that as well. So clearly a company that is used to dealing with sports and some very big sports there as well. We don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves, but I mean, one of the things was that one of the comments in here is that they could take it out of World Rugby. Now, personally, I don't see how that would work as let's be honest, this would have to involve the All Blacks, because that is the brand that brings in all of the income for New Zealand Rugby currently. And so the All Blacks got to have someone to play, haven't they? You can't just play yourself. So clearly, quite how it would involve breaking. We obviously give New Zealand Rugby a stronger bargaining chip, but I'm not sure they'll be able to pull themselves out entirely of World Rugby. They are obviously there are obviously talks with their Sanzar people, etc., as well. But one of the points here is that, look, New Zealand cannot afford to make a multi-million loss every year that is covered by a once every 12-year Lions tour, which is the current model that we have now. One of the items that we discussed this week, or this on Tuesday night in Hash Rugby Chat, is the New Zealand Rugby finances. And one of the things we've learned is that their cash reserve has stayed pretty much stable for the last decade. So clearly they've have been coasting for a while, and in a situation where they are basically living pretty much hand to mouth. So clearly things need to change for that going forwards. There's obviously as AIG will be disappearing off the All Blacks jerseys after the end of 2021, I think it is, or was it 2020? But anyway, soon. But there are plenty of suitors to take their place. The All Blacks brand is strong enough that there will be a sponsor on there, and finding a sponsor will not be a problem. But clearly, a lot of things need. The financial model needs to change in rugby because it is not sustainable. And one of the things we're seeing now is, whilst the discussions at the beginning of the coronavirus about a month or so ago was all about there being a blank slate, we're now seeing a lot of the things of how do we make the existing pieces survive through this. And so you don't really have a blank slate if you have existing competitions and existing teams. So there really does need to be some sort of rethink as sort of funding around this. One of the comments in the article from an unnamed source was about Australia, and the source said, "Can the professional game in the short term survive over there? Will they actually have enough money to pay for the Reds, Waratahs, Brumbies, and Werribs? How are they going to pay the Wallabies? Are they going to have to return to Manly versus Randwick club rugby and have their best players overseas? it's really difficult to look at Australia with a multi-million losses and figure out how they are going to get out of that hole. I think we have to ignore Australia because it's too much of a variable. That is obviously very scary if you are Rugby Australia. That New Zealand Rugby is saying, look, there is too many variables over there. It's very difficult for we can't rely on that in our future planning. Now, in the short-term planning of perhaps that Super Rugby crossover or Bledisloe Cups, that would be a different thing entirely, but long-term is a different issue. As I say, that article is in the New Zealand Herald if you want to get all of the details. Moving on to the NBL now, the New Zealand National Basketball League, and it looks like two teams have decided they will not be able to take part in the initial setup or for the post-COVID setup. Those being Wellington due to financial issues and Otago because they don't see the value of just being televised without crowds or home games. It looks like they are planning a 6 to 8 team league with all the games happening in one place. Very similar to perhaps netball, but in netball they're allowing the teams to return home during the week. In basketball, they were looking at having a sort of bio bubble for a set period of time to host the whole thing, but they may be able to allow people to go home at some points during that. The teams that are already or are looking at so the two teams are Wellington Saints and Southland Sharks that have decided they're not going to. Nelson Giants, Canterbury Rams, and Franklin Bulls are all in. As are Otago, who are due to enter next year. Hawke's Bay, Taranaki, and Manawatu are the ones that are still in discussions as to whether they will or won't take part, and that's why it's taken them some time to announce their plans as to how quickly they'll be able to move when they get to level 2. So maybe some good basketball on the way. They're looking at having a draft. Players who get drafted in the first round will get something like $7,500, whereas those at the end will get $2,000. So clearly, not a lot of cash for the players there in salary terms. But what it does mean is it gives them exposure for the Trans-Tasman Australian Basketball League, which was the Breakers take part in from Auckland. And the idea is obviously with the lockdown and the lack of international players, there'll be more opportunities for New Zealand players. So hence this would be a very good shop window if you are an upcoming basketball player and looking for a contract. Also, with all that lockdown, there are many more, or some of the overseas players are based in New Zealand and may decide to take part as well, just to get some game time in their legs. So it looks like the stock of players are as good as they have ever been. Finally, then, just to talk about grassroots rugby, and apparently they've talked about grassroots rugby being able to return at level 2. The problem with that, though, is how are you going to police the grounds? Are clubs going to be expected to police it themselves? Because you can easily have 500 people around 4 games, especially if you have a junior game, a women's game, and then also a men's game happening on the same day, back to back at the same venue. And if any All Blacks were to turn up, they've had up to 2,000 spectators when All Blacks junior Severe Manonu lined up against Periwipu once at the Polo Grounds in Miramar. So yes, there are, as I say, issues to overcome there for both, but some soccer does, or football does, believe that they will be able to work with those within rugby. There's obviously more discussions to be had between the clubs and the authorities there. You are now up to date with all of the important sports news. It is the best way to start your day. Don't forget to like the Facebook page, New Zealand Sports Radio, so you don't miss out on any of our shows. Or if you prefer to listen rather than watch, then subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Acast, and all your favourite podcast apps. Just search for New Zealand Sport Radio.